The summer heat clung to Philadelphia like a damp cloak in July 1776. Windows in the State House were shut tight against prying ears, but inside, the air was thick with the knowledge of what was about to happen. 56 men took quills in hand, aware that a single stroke of ink would change their lives forever. Benjamin Franklin leaned toward his fellow delegates and murmured, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." The uneasy laughter that followed did nothing to hide the truth. They were committing treason in the eyes of the crown. Each name would be posted in London as the mark of a rebel. If caught, they would hang. John Hancock, the President of Congress, signed first. His name so large, he said, so King George can read it without his spectacles. He was already a marked man. His ships in Boston Harbor had been seized, his fortune crippled. To Hancock, the cause was worth far more than his wealth. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a prosperous merchant with ships crossing the Atlantic, knew his signature was a gamble with his fortune as the stake. His ships would be taken, his plantations seized, his business shattered. He would die a poorer man than he had ever imagined. Thomas Nelson Jr. would face perhaps the most brutal choice. In 1781, during the siege of Yorktown, British officers made his grand home their headquarters. American gunners hesitated to fire on it. Nelson urged Washington to target the house, his own house, saying liberty was worth more than brick and mortar. Moments later, cannonballs tore through the walls. William Floyd of New York fled Long Island when British troops arrived. His wife and children wandered as refugees for 7 years, never sleeping twice in the same bed, while his estate was left to ruin. Francis Lewis of New York lost more than property. When the British overran his home, they captured his wife. She was thrown into a dark, filthy cell without a change of clothes or bedding. Denied medical care, her health failed rapidly. She was finally released in a prisoner exchange, but her spirit and body were broken. She died within 2 years. Richard Stockton of New Jersey returned from Congress to find loyalists waiting. He was dragged from his bed, stripped of warm clothing, and imprisoned in the bitter winter cold. His health collapsed in the cell. When he was released, he was near death. His property had been looted, his papers burned, his fortune gone. John Hart of New Jersey left the side of his dying wife to join Congress. When the British invaded, he was hunted like an animal, sleeping in forests and caves for months. By the time he returned home, his wife was dead, his 13 children scattered, and his farm destroyed. Lewis Morris of New York lost nearly everything. His family fled their estate before the British arrived. When they returned, every field was scorched, every building torn down or burned. His cattle were slaughtered where they stood. Lyman Hall of Georgia came home to find his land seized and his possessions taken. Even as a physician, he could do little to rebuild in the chaos of war. His wealth was gone, but his loyalty to independence was unshaken. Samuel Adams had little in the way of riches, but his political influence made him a constant target. British officers called him the chief incendiary. His property was abandoned, his income gone, his family supported only through friends and fellow patriots. Robert Morris, known as the financier of the Revolution, did more than risk his name. He used his own personal credit to secure food, arms, and pay for the Continental Army. He co-signed loans with his own fortune as collateral. Years later, the crushing debts would land him in debtor's prison, yet he never claimed the sacrifices were too great. Benjamin Harrison of Virginia, known for his humor, masked his worry for his family's safety. His wealth could not shield him from the raids and destruction that swept through the South. George Walton of Georgia was struck by musket fire during the Battle of Savannah. Captured by the British, he endured months in prison before being exchanged. He returned to find his property overrun and his career interrupted by war. Thomas McKean of Delaware spent the war in constant motion. Serving in Congress while commanding militia, he moved his family 5 times in a single year to escape advancing British forces. "My home," he once said, "is wherever the enemy is not." William Whipple of New Hampshire sold off much of his wealth to supply the war effort. He freed his enslaved servant Prince Whipple, saying, "He who fights for liberty ought to have his own." Even Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the wealthiest of the signers, suffered. His land and crops were burned, his tenants scattered. His Catholic faith made him a target for suspicion, yet he traveled tirelessly to keep Maryland committed to the fight. Some paid the ultimate price. Button Gwinnett, signer from Georgia, was killed in a duel the year after signing, leaving his family in poverty. Others, like Thomas Lynch Jr., fell ill and died before the war's end, never seeing the nation they had helped create. When victory finally came in 1783, the world saw a new nation born. But the men who had signed the Declaration often returned to ashes and empty fields. Many were poorer than when they had begun, some in debt, others broken in health. Yet in their letters and speeches afterward, not one declared the sacrifice too high. John Adams would later reflect, "Posterity, you will never know how much it cost the present generation to preserve your freedom. I hope you will make good use of it." But they left behind something far greater than they had lost. A nation built upon the idea that liberty was worth every risk, every hardship, every drop of blood. Because they believed that we are free to remember them, not as victims of history, but as its authors. The sacrifice that was made by these 56 men and countless others to both establish and maintain our liberty has given us the privilege of living in freedom since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The names of the generals and the politicians are often the only ones remembered from the Revolutionary War period, as most people forget about the common enlisted American soldier. However, these are the patriots who most likely made the single greatest sacrifice of the war. Samuel Bailey Jr. was one of them. Born November 14, 1728 in Bradford, Massachusetts, the son of Samuel and Mary Bailey, he married Hannah Kittredge on January 22, 1753 in Andover. They had at least 5 children together. On April 19, 1775, Samuel Jr. was a private in Captain Joshua Holt's company during the Lexington Alarm, marching from Andover to Cambridge for a day and a half. Soon after, he enlisted under Captain Charles Furbush in Colonel Ebenezer Bridges' regiment on May 27, 1775. Family tradition, recorded in Bailey's History of Andover, holds that at the Battle of Bunker Hill, when Captain Furbush was disabled, Samuel took command, leading the company bravely until he himself was killed. His death was attested to by Captain Furbush, though Samuel was still listed as a private on the official muster rolls, turned in August 1, 1775 after his death. His name appears among the fallen on a bronze plaque at Bunker Hill. On that very battlefield, his 16-year-old son retrieved his father's watch and brought it home to Andover. Another was William Whartonby from New Brunswick Township, Middlesex County, New Jersey. Enlisting in 1777 as a private in Captain James Morgan's company of the 2nd Regiment, Middlesex County Militia, William returned home on leave to find both parents dead from smallpox. So far decomposed they could not be handled. He wrapped them in sheets, buried them together in a single grave, and returned to service. Paid £9 and 3 shillings for his time, he later married Catherine White. Between 1778 and 1780, he paid rateable tax in Southward, New Jersey, contributing to the revenue of the young state. In 1785, he moved his family to Ohio County, Virginia, now Brooke County, West Virginia, where he purchased 110 acres on Buffalo Creek, built grist and sawmills, and lived out his life with Catherine. As peace settled over the new United States, Thomas Jefferson, whose pen had given the Declaration its voice, wrote to a friend, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure." He was not calling for war, but acknowledging the cost of preserving freedom. He knew that liberty was not a gift handed down. It was a prize that demanded sacrifice in every generation. Benjamin Franklin, in his final years, was asked whether all the struggle, the suffering, and the loss had been worth it. His reply was measured but firm. "Our cause is the cause of all mankind. We have acted in the noblest manner, if we have done no more than prove that men are capable of governing themselves." The signers had indeed proved it. With steady hands, they had placed their names on a fragile piece of parchment, never knowing if it would lead to glory or the gallows. They endured exile, prison, fire, and ruin. Some gave their health, others their fortunes, and a few their lives. But they left behind something far greater than they had lost. A nation built upon the idea that liberty was worth every risk, every hardship, every drop of blood. Because they believed that we are free to remember them not as victims of history, but as its authors. It is not often that we pause to honor the thousands who went to battle to turn America from a scattered group of colonies into one nation. Patriots like Samuel Bailey Jr., Samuel Chase, Francis Lewis, Richard Stockton, and William Whartonby sacrificed so much for the freedoms we enjoy today. The least we can do is honor all of our little-known patriots whenever we have the opportunity. Freedom, after all, is never free. As always, thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about American history, please like, share, and follow.